Okay, well, I think everybody here knows me. I'm Lori Dan, and I'd like to introduce our presenters today. Karen Hatfield is President and Chief Marketing Muse of Pythia, LLC, a marketing strategy consultancy helping companies create consumer-focused solutions and launch them successfully. Karen is a passionate, seasoned marketing and innovation professional with over 30 years experience growing businesses ranging from a $500 million multinational brand to startups and small to medium-sized businesses. She's developed and implemented creative and effective strategies for innovation, development, brand building, competitive positioning, pricing, e-commerce, and integrated multi-channel marketing. And also Kelly Kaminsky is founder and principal of GRIP, a creative agency headquartered in Chicago with a background in design and over 2 decades of leading the studio. Kelly's readily shifts from creative brainstorming to business-minded discussions without missing a beat. Her experience leverages culture and creative inspiration from an international perspective. She's created a vibrant, supportive, people-first studio that allows everyone to grow, laugh, succeed, and contribute. She believes that transparency and empathy lead to richer client relationships and has consequently built long-lasting connections with clients such as Whole Foods, LL Bean, Tao, and Panera, and more. So I will let you both take it from here. How would you like to handle questions? Do you want people just to let you know or put something in the chat or wait until the end? What's best for you all?
I would say maybe pop something into the chat so we don't forget it, but I'm also fine with people just jumping in. Like, we can be very casual about this, but we will leave some time at the end for question and answers.
Okay,
yep, agreed.
Well, we'll get started and hopefully we'll have some more folks jumping on here soon. And I'm just going to mute.
Karen, I am having trouble sharing my screen. I was worried this would happen. I had trouble the other day. Is there any way that you can share the presentation?
I can try, Lori, if you can.
I'm so sorry.
No, no worries.
Just keeps giving me an error message every time I try to share my screen. I don't know why.
Gotta love technology.
Oh, I know.
Oh, great. Let's see if this will work. Let's see if I can get this to. Just want to minimize the slides at the side there, but I'm not sure how to do that. You want to just roll with it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Can everybody see our screen?
I'm not seeing the bottom though.
Okay. Let me see if I can do this better.
Sorry, Karen, I really put you on the spot there.
No, that's all right. That's all right.
If you the 3 lines up in the left corner, does that the other corner, the left one, does that give you an option to go into presentation mode?
Let's see.
Where it says PLC presentation final, just to the left. Yeah.
Ah,
there you go.
You've done this before, once or twice. I've just not done it from PDF. I've done it from PowerPoint. So my apologies for my learning curve here, but we're good.
Okay, awesome. Well, thank you for that kind introduction, Lori. As she said, I'm Kelly Kaminsky, and I'm the founder and principal of GRIP. I'm going to talk a little bit today about branding, and as you see on the agenda, we're going to touch on some things that have to do with what makes a brand successful and how you build it, and the role of strategy and positioning. And at the end, we'll have a few takeaways, and as we said earlier, we'll also have some time for question and answers. And Karen is going to talk a little bit more about marketing and how that layers on top of the branding work, and some of those strategy fundamentals and channels and tactics and customer journeys, tips and tricks. So we've got a lot of fun stuff to share with you today. And hopefully we'll hear from you as well and handle some of your questions. So with that, let's jump right into the first section, which is the branding portion. And the company that I work for, GRIP, has been around for 23 years, and there's almost never been a project that we've worked on that doesn't have some branding element to it. So this is really an important part of the work that we do, but also, an important, I hope that I can impart onto you how important it is to your company and how important it is to the work that you're doing and the success that you're trying to achieve. So let's talk a little bit. Can you scroll forward just a couple slides? There we go. So let's talk a little bit about these definitions in terms of kind of what we're talking about today. So branding is really revolving around the work that you do to tell your audience that you exist and what you stand for as a company. It's very much of an introduction. It's very much of saying who you are and what you do, but really more about what you stand for. So getting to know you as a company and trying to relate to your customers. You often hear it sort of called reasons to believe, which sounds very touchy-feely, but in a good way. And I think it's something that we can all really get behind as part of a success measure. We're talking a little bit about marketing as something that is very much hand in hand with branding, and there is quite a bit of overlap, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. But marketing tends to revolve a little bit more around what it is you're selling. So if branding is who you are, marketing is what you do, and that's very broad stroke. And like I said, there's a lot of overlap, especially when it comes to awareness tactics and letting people know how to find you and all of those things that are essential to making those connections with customers. But that's kind of how we're looking at it as just from a broad stroke perspective. So let's talk a little bit about what from a high level what I like to impart about branding. It is to create awareness and to make the audience feel like they know you. Ultimately, that's really the goal of any good branding. Unfortunately, it also happens with bad branding, and it gets across the wrong idea. It is this kind of top of the funnel activities, and it really should be a solid foundation before you start delving into more of these marketing tactics and letting people know about the specifics of what you do and what you're selling or what your services are. And branding is really a long-term dividends type of deal. So it's not something where you're going to have an instant reaction. It's something that you build over time through lots and lots of interactions with your clients. So it's something that you should plan on having some sort of long-term dividends. And it's also, and this is a really important point, it does create an emotional link between your company and your clients. So you're trying to get across these positive feelings. And when I say feelings, I really mean that, because I think it's something that people often look at very tactically, or look at in a really statistical fashion. And a lot of times we try to get folks to also connect with the idea that it is this emotional link. We do have these visceral feelings about brands. And if you look at on the next slide, there's a handful of brands that you may interact with or you may not. I'm sure you've heard of most of, or if not all of these. And when you look at those, you do, at least for me, I do have an emotional reaction to a lot of these brands. And that, and I wanted to talk about that just to illustrate the point that it's not necessarily, I don't think of a particular ad that I saw, or, Apple is a good example. This has been thousands of interactions I've had with this company that have built my feelings around Apple. It's not one single product. It's not one interaction with the company. It's certainly not an ad campaign. It is over and over and over these different types of things that have layered on to make me kind of understand or have an emotional reaction to this company. And this, that's obviously a huge corporation, but this happens on our level too. The size of companies that we all run, people do have feelings about your company, and generating positivity around that is kind of the goal of your branding efforts. And I'm going to come back to this slide and talk a little bit more about how that works, and again about sort of how we feel about brands and how important that is. But first, let's talk a little bit more about some of how that happens. And it really comes down to perception. So perception is so important to understand, because unfortunately we can't just put out a message into the world and know that it's going to resonate 100%. It really is how people perceive your brand, and that overall perception adds up over time, like I said, and generally falls into kind of these 4 buckets. So all of these micro interactions that you have with over months and over years, they add up hopefully to this positive connotation. And those 4 buckets that perception generally falls along. Number 1 is people. The folks that you have hired at your company, all of those folks will, the attitude and the character and the quality of those people is going to manifest itself in every facet of your brand. And that's a big part of how people will perceive you. In particular, us as leaders, that makes a huge difference. And you are a big part of that brand. It's not just your logo. It's not something that's disconnected from you, or something that is sort of at bay and that you have nothing to do with, because it is very much, people are very much a part of branding, and certainly in terms of how we perceive a branding. Your product is the what. So obviously people are going to interact with whatever it is that you sell or the service that you provide, and how people feel about that. There's no amount of great branding work that can save a bad product or service. And we all know that from personal experience. When we have a negative interaction with a certain brand, it taints our perception of that brand for months or years to come, sometimes forever. You may never go back to that company again. So it is obviously a very critical part about how people think of you. Process is also super important. So that's all the hows. How do you produce what you do or provide the service you provide? And that can be everything from, obviously, customer service is a big part of it, but all aspects of the customer experience. So everything to do with operations, it could be something to do with how you source your materials, it could be how fast things are delivered. All of those things are part of our brand perception. And then lastly is this why, or your promise. And this is the part that we have a bit more control over, because it's the message that we put out into the world about our company and about our services. So what is it that we hope people are perceiving about our people, product, and process? And unfortunately, it's probably the least effective in terms of how much you can sway people, because they will have much bigger feelings about your people, your product, and your process than what you say you are. So it's an interesting conundrum in that, as much as we try to control that, it's not always, it's not always in our hand. And we have to be aware that people are building this perception of our brand through these 4 different buckets, which is kind of scary to think that you don't have as much control as you think you do, but still each of those are important when you're considering how your brand is being perceived. So let's take a look again at this screen of logos, and we can break down kind of what I mean by that. So when I think about a few of these brands that I personally really love, and I'm sorry that you're going to learn a little bit more about me than you probably bargained for, because this is my personal attachment and my emotional response to these. So the New York Times, for me, of course, I like the product, but I'm also very attached to some of the people. So some of the writers and some of the editorial authors that are part of the New York Times, I resonate with. And so for me, that's very much of a people perception, and that relationship with the New York Times has grown and been very, very positive for me. So, but when I think about it, it's not necessarily just about the product, and it's not necessarily just about the brand and the name and who they say they are. It's because I've personally resonated with some of those folks. A couple examples of how Artifact Uprising is a products company that creates gifts and home goods and things. They have the best customer service I've ever experienced in my life. So that's one of those things that's just made me a fan for life, right? Those little interactions that, I mean, yes, the products are nice and I like their branding and I like what they say about themselves, but really the how has made me a loyal customer. So that's another way that you can sort of think of how those buckets come into play. Origins is a skincare company. And again, this is a good example of the how, because I like the fact that they source all their ingredients and everything is all natural. And for me, yes, the product is great, but that in part has made a big difference in why that's a brand that I'm loyal to. And Stumptown is a coffee that I love. And so this is really all about the product. I like a lot of the things that the ways that I've interacted with them, but what comes down to it is it's always consistently a good cup of coffee. So sometimes it's as simple as that. And the things that we do, whether it's branding work or marketing work, are layered on top of that. But if our product isn't great, it's not going to save it. And likewise, we can also develop these sort of negative feelings about companies, and it doesn't always have to do with the product itself or what it is that you're providing. Chick-fil-A is an example of, I just don't align or resonate with what they stand for as a company. And they might have a great chicken sandwich, but I'm not going to give them my hard-earned money. And that's a good way to kind of think about, the branding question is you have to convince someone to like you enough that they're going to give you their very hard-earned money. And that's a brand that I don't personally resonate with. And again, this has nothing to do with their product. I've never actually even eaten there. So it's an interesting thing to think about how, and this is also a PR issue for this particular company, but it's certainly something to think about when it comes to this kind of brand perception. Tesla is a good example of a people problem for me personally. So I don't resonate with the leadership in that company. I don't necessarily feel like, but I had an interesting conversation. My sister's actually in the market to buy a electric car. And I asked her what she was test driving, and she was not driving a Tesla. And I said, how come? And she said to me, well, I'm just not a Tesla person. And that really resonated with me, because I mean, that is very much a reflection of, I do not align with the brand. And I was like, yeah, I'm not either. And the truth is neither one of us have ever driven a Tesla or even ridden in a Tesla. But because their brand has such a strong message and we know so much about it, we're not Tesla people, which I think is an interesting way to think about how branding is again, a very emotional, visceral reaction. Xfinity, aka Comcast, is the worst customer service I've ever had in my life. And it doesn't matter if they have the fastest cable in the whole wide world, I'll never be a Comcast customer again, because I just had so many bad experiences. So again, has nothing to do with their product or really with their brand in terms of what they say about themselves or the messaging and the way that they package themselves visually. It has everything to do with the how, and that customer service has turned me off for life. So maybe you have also experienced the joy of Comcast, but these are good examples of how we need to think of how emotional it is, and how it's not just a nice logo or a good website. It's very much this emotional attachment that we're trying to build. So if we look at a successful brand, or kind of a successful brand exercise, over time, we want people to move along this spectrum from awareness to trust to loyalty to evangelism, or being advocates of the brand. And this is something that, again, this doesn't happen overnight, but it accumulates over hundreds of micro interactions, over months and even years, and sometimes over a lifetime of interacting with a brand. But every step that we take and every decision that we make as leaders, and every person that we hire, they all affect this moving customers along this spectrum, and hopefully building, continuing to build more and more trust, and continuing to build more and more brand loyalists or even evangelists. So the higher they move along the spectrum, the more emotionally connected they are to you. Again, I know I keep coming back to that emotional side of it, but that really is what we're trying to build. And the more the more this happens, the more we build what's called brand equity. So this is very much the realized benefits, commercial benefits of people moving along this spectrum. So it's increased sales, increased average order of sales, all these things that turned into actual dollars of having a memorable and a positively reinforced, recognizable brand. So if we start to look at what makes a brand toolkit, these are the building blocks and the assets that typically make up a basic brand toolkit. So everything, the things that logo and colors and typography, what you say about yourself, your tone of voice, building out a good style guideline, because really the key to this, and the fact that these are all the building blocks that you're going to use for a good brand toolkit, the key is consistency. So knowing what these things are, it's surprising to me how many people think it's just a logo, but really it's this broad set of tools that you're going to use consistently across all of your marketing and all of your branding work and all of your digital materials, etc. So that you create a really, really consistent voice, both visually and verbally, to kind of be the parameters that guard that brand and that keep it consistent and cohesive. But before all of this happens, those elements and those building blocks have to reflect a deeper issue, and that really is all around your brand strategy. And that's, again, something that I see people kind of skip over, and yet it's so critical to building out a good brand. And those things often look like brand pillars, positioning, messaging. You'll hear a brand narrative. There's a lot of different terms and things that you can delve into depending on how complicated your brand strategy needs to be. But looking at those strategy elements is really an important part of where you start, because it is the foundation for everything that comes after it. And those components need to be built and solidified and finalized before you start looking at logo and color palette and typography, because really those things must reflect the strategy. And let's dig into that a little bit more. The first component of any good strategy is trying to figure out your audience and to identify who those folks are. And it's surprising to me how many times we have a meeting and people will say things like, well, everybody would like this. But really, that's such a missed opportunity, because first of all, that's not true. Not everyone is everyone is definitely not an effective answer, and you're missing some opportunity to really speak directly to people. Because if we go back to the idea that we want people to know us as a company and feel like they have emotional resonance with us, it cannot sound like it's just for anyone, right? It needs to sound like it's for them. And that's going to build stronger bonds and stronger emotional resonance than if something is just very surface and sort of sounds like it's generic and it's for anybody. So Karen's going to dig a little bit more into some of these, some of the customer journeys, which is a deeper level, but it starts with this broader aspect of identifying who your audience is. And real quickly, your primary audience is going to be the people that resonate the most with what you need or what you're offering. So their needs are very much aligned with what it is that you have to offer. Karen, if you can go to the next slide, I think I have a one on that. Yep. So these are the folks that are going to appreciate not only what you're selling or what you have to offer, but also the attitude and positioning of the company. Like I said earlier, a lot of times it's not just about what it is you're selling, but very much about aligning with who you are as people or who you are as a company. And so that's an important thing to look at. Who do you really want as a customer, that your product or service is going to be exactly what they need? And looking at things like pain points and really understanding what it is they need is going to be key to that. We often talk about this primary audience as a real focal point, but understanding not just the demographics, getting deeper into what it is that is their pain points. Sorry, I'm like choking on my own voice here. One second. Apologies. I don't usually talk quite this much at 8 a.m. So if we look at the secondary audience, again, these are often going to overlap, but not necessarily be in complete alignment with your primary audience. And one of the things to keep in mind is there's often decision makers that are kind of secondary or lurking behind our primary audience. And the easiest example of that for sure is if you're building a product that's for kids. Obviously kids are your market, are your target, but parents are lurking behind. And the younger those kids are, the more important the parents are as they get older. It's almost, there is certainly more autonomy in choosing brands and products and services and things like that. But parents are certainly a part of that decision too. So keep in mind, there's always going to be a secondary audience that's partially aligned with potentially your primary audience, and messaging can be slightly altered to make sure that we're talking to them as well.
One thing I'd throw in here as well is oftentimes in a business to business context, there are multiple decision makers. So there's one primary audience that you're trying to reach, but then there are others that you need to influence in some way, shape, or form. And so that's another consideration for a secondary audience as well.
That's a really good point. No matter what it is, who it is that you're identifying, primary or multiple secondary audiences, this understanding is really an exercise in empathy. So it's not just about demographics. And we often talk about this as a human-centered approach. And it's not to say that demographics aren't important, but it's more important to look at as your potential customers really as humans, and to truly care about what it is they need and what is bothering them in their life or their business or their day-to-day that you may be able to solve. And that is where the key is in terms of really, really understanding. Because if you want your prospective customers to relate to you, of course you have to understand them on as deep a level as you can. And I know that sounds, it's easier said than done. But it is an important exercise to understand and to really look at it from an empathy view. And instead of just saying, okay, my audience is 35 to 50 years old and they do this, really look at what do they care about? How do we align with them as a company? So I want to just show you a quick example of how we do this. But first, I'm going to just define these few things for us. And there, like I said, there are a lot of components to brand strategy. So I'm just going to touch on a few of them because I think these are kind of the keys and the most important, and certainly the place to start. But overall brand strategy are these intentional actions that you take that reinforce your brand pillars, so that really get across your key messages of who you are. And brand pillars can simply be looked at as a simple set of words or statements, kind of what you say about yourself, your stake in the ground. And this really helps you to have a focal point and something that you can really, rest, lean back on and say, yes, we are these three things, for example. And the positioning statement is an internal facing statement. Hopefully you all have one. If you don't, this is why I kind of wanted to talk about it today. It describes what you do and for whom and why and what makes you different. And this is as you try to drill it down to be as simple as you can. A good positioning statement will help set you apart from competitors. And we're going to look just real quickly at an example of that. So sorry. So this is, I just pulled this from a deck that we did for a customer. They were launching a new, it's called Eatertainment venue, which is obviously entertainment and dining together. The venue is very, very similar to Topgolf, which you may be familiar with. But they have a wider variety in activities to attract more people. And they have really upscale food and beverage. So not just like typical bar food or, fried cheese sticks, but a really, really delicious menu and something that's more upscale. So we helped them to build this brand strategy. And these are a few excerpts of how we started that process. So offerings are really just the truths about what you're offering. These are just facts, very straightforward. We started to compile all the things that they were going to do and all the things that they wanted to do. and sort of organize them into buckets that made sense. We started to make connections between these different offerings and what they, what they actually wanted to produce as a product. And we started to notice that these are the things that rose to the top. So flexibility was a big one in terms of the audience that they wanted to capture, the social aspect of coming and having a great time and making memories. And then again, doing something that's a little more elevated. So there's a little bit more sophistication in their offerings. They had a partnership with Jack Nicklaus, so that they were really looking to create something that was unique and a bit more upscale than say a typical sports bar or something like that. So these attributes became sort of our 3 brand pillars, and everything that we did had to mention at least 1 or 2 of these to kind of continue to push these ideas. And so messaging really was built around those 3 attributes, and those became our brand pillars. And when we look back at those, we say, okay, if these are our brand pillars, then this list of offerings here, this is kind of our evidence. This is how we're saying, this is the meat behind it, because obviously we can't just say we're an elevated brand if we can't back it up. So these things go very much hand in hand when you look at sort of this evidence and then these brand pillars. And from that, we started to build narratives around those 3 pillars, right? So I'm not going to read this to you, but if we share the deck later, you can dig in a little bit more and kind of see how we did that. But we took those ideas of flexible, social, and elevated. Again, this is internally facing, and started to say, how are we going to tell that story to other people? And so this is sort of the internal description of how we might begin and why it's important to get across this kind of these aspects of the company and of the brand. And these brand pillars really became something that we could lean on and constantly check ourselves against, saying, does this reflect 1 or more of these brand pillars? Everything we produce needed to look and reflect these things. So it's really something that you can, use as building blocks and start to say, this strategy is going to drive everything that we say and everything that we produce about ourselves, and make sure that it's truly us. And this is the positioning statement that came out of it. Again, I won't read this to you, but you can dig in later if you want to. But you can see that the primary and secondary audiences are in here. We've got the audience need, these folks that are looking for a really different experience and want to vary their social activities. We want to provide something, and that here's where you see the pillars come in, that's elevated, customized, and socially invigorating. And we're going to do that through a completely different golf and games venue that does not exist. Of course, this was in Chicago, so that does not exist in Chicago right now. And that's really going to surprise and delight and engage everybody that comes through our door. And at the bottom there's a template for a positioning statement. Again, there's a lot of varieties of these kinds of things, and everyone may need to customize this as they see fit. But this is a good kind of baseline for what your positioning statement should be. So again, it's gonna name your target market. It's gonna say what you're providing and what makes it different, and the reason why the target market should believe in you, that sort of evidence to back it up. And from that statement, we end up building everything that's external. So the elevator pitch could come from that, longer form copy could come from that, but it's all going to stem from that foundational piece of that positioning statement. So let's talk a little bit about allocating resources. This is an important thing, because I think it's really, really necessary to have a balance here. And again, there is a lot of overlap between branding and marketing, and there's things that are clearly going to fall into both buckets. The most obvious example is your website. So your website's going to spend some time saying, this is who we are. And your website's going to spend some time saying, this is what we offer and why it's great. So there are a lot of efforts that you're going to make that are going to fall under both camps. But it's important to kind of look at your allocating your resources so that you are spending about 50-50 on branding and marketing, because again, it's important for people to know who you are. That's going to make it a lot easier to then turn around and sell them something. So just to kind of reiterate what these elements are, branding might be something like looking at rebranding. If you've been around a while and you feel like you need to dust off the branding that you're working with right now and do something like a rebranding or a brand audit to sort of figure out what it is that you want to say. It could be some high level messaging that again refers back to your positioning statement. It's the About Us page on your website, or promoting your people like staff bios and headshots, or potentially an awareness campaign that lives on social media or elsewhere. Again, this list could go on, and same for the marketing side, but these are things like a direct mail campaign, or doing sales sheets that really detail your products, or an email blast that's targeted, a social media ad buys that are targeted, a referral campaign, anything that has to do with lead generation. This is all kind of on the marketing side, which gets layered on top of all these branding efforts. And I think one of the important parts about this is, if branding is the foundation and you're establishing a strong emotional connection with your customers, then when you layer in marketing on top of it, it becomes, like I said, a lot easier to sell to those folks because they already know you. And I kind of think of it as, you know, if you spent all of your time on branding alone, or all of your investment on branding alone, it's like introducing yourself to thousands of people, but never really telling them what it is that you sell, or what is this great offering that you have. And if you spend all of your time and all of your resources on marketing, you've now turned into, you know, that guy where you're just selling people stuff all the time and trying to beat their door down to sell them something, but they don't know who the heck you are. So why would they buy from you? So if you find this balance, you're creating, when you do try to sell somebody something, or do a campaign that is, you know, on the marketing side, you're allowing people to buy from someone that they feel like they know, and that they've established a certain amount of trust or familiarity with. At least awareness, that's the sort of base level. If you haven't moved up that spectrum, even having awareness will help you and convert more customers. So having some kind of balance there is really, really important. And there are times where we shift slightly, and I you know, 50-50, while it's kind of a good benchmark, is not necessarily the end all be all. But if you look at your own personal situation, you know, you might spend a little bit more on branding than marketing if you're a brand new company, because you really have some legwork to do in terms of awareness. Or if you're a lifestyle brand or luxury product, it might not be a great tactic to do all kinds of you know, sales promotions, because what you're really selling is this lifestyle, and you're going to spend a little bit more time on that, you know, promoting that brand. Same thing with new leadership. If you have you know, if you want to talk about that, that's going to be on the branding side, and you're going to want to make sure that you understand, okay, this is who we are now. Likewise, there might be times where you spend a bit more on marketing, and sometimes this will shift year to year. It's important to look at how you're allocating resources based on where you are right now. So if you've got a super well-established customer base and you're a B2B company, maybe you spend a little bit more on marketing because you feel like we've already established this connection. We're emotionally connected to our customers. Let's let them know about this new product or service that we're launching. Or similar, if you have a seasonal product or service, maybe that's something that, you know, again, you've already established a line of connection with your customers, and now it's time to kind of spend a little bit more money on marketing. But it shouldn't stray too far from this 50-50 mix. So it's something to look at. And again, I know it's hard to delineate sometimes because there are things that are going to fall into both camps, but it'll be a really good benchmark for you if you look at how you're allocating those resources and sticking as close to that 50-50 mix as you can. So just a couple things that I want to make sure I got across today. Investing in your brand is really important because you want people to know you. And again, that's going to make it 10 times easier to sell to them when they see something that you do on the marketing side. If they feel like they've already got a connection, if they've already, you know, have awareness or any kind of positive resonance with your company, they're that much more likely to sell. I mean, it's easy to put into perspective when you think about your own day to day, and you might get a couple different marketing emails. If you know a company, you're much more likely to even open that email and see what they have to say. If you've never heard of them before, I mean, I'm just like, why didn't this go to junk? So again, these marketing tactics don't work as well if your people don't know who you are. The best way to evaluate your current brand, I think this is something that comes up a lot, is to ask your audience and even your prospective customers, if you can, having a conversation and doing that over and over and over with as many people as you can will tell you a lot about how people perceive your brand, what they think about it, what they feel about it. And this is something that you can do yourself, and you can ask other folks on your staff to do, to try to get a sense of what people really think about your product and what is resonating with them. Is it the people? Is it the how? Is it the product itself? And how can you build on in those other buckets to continue to build that emotional resonance with your customer base? Excuse me. For a more in-depth review and a deeper dive, you can always do a brand audit with a team, with an outside team. That's a good way to look at, what are customers thinking about us? What are they feeling about us? What are the pain points? Why do they like us? And why don't they like us? What can we improve on? Those kinds of things are really important to understand. Certainly, if you've been around a long time and you've seen a dip in sales, or if you're trying to do something new, a brand audit can be a really effective way to kind of reset and strategize of how do we move forward in an effective way. One thing that I again want to emphasize is that you can't be everything to everyone. And I think a lot of people try to do that because it seems like you're casting the widest net. But really your brand has to be specific, and it's better to be a bit more narrow, because there is that, that ripple effect. You will hit more people than you think. And if you create these strong emotional ties with your audience, they will become, ultimately, hopefully they will become these advocates for you, and you will reach even a larger market than the market that you targeted. It also has to be authentically you, build that camp of evidence so that, these are the things that we can come back and say, this is why we say what we say, because we have all this evidence to back it up. And your brand should also evolve with you. So, as business owners, that your company evolves, changes, things happen, people leave, your people are different, whatever it is. And I think it's really important to take a step back and look at that evolution. And is your brand still reflective of who you are? And lastly, I think it's really important to make sure that everybody on your team, because we know how important people are, should be aligned with your vision and your positioning statement and your brand pillars. They need to know this strategy. They need to know the underpinnings of your brand, because they're the ones that are out there making connections with your customers on a daily basis. And it's shocking to me how many times we'll talk to somebody at a company that we're working with, and I mean, it's amazing that nobody can rattle off the positioning statement, but it is interesting that folks further down the food chain, they really have no idea what the brand stands for. And I don't think it's fair to ask them to be a representative of the brand if they really don't know what it is. So it's important to share this with these things with your team and staff. And I know that sounds really obvious, but it's surprising how many people, if you ask them, what is our position in the marketplace, and what is it that we're trying to do and trying to say about our brand. It's surprising how many people actually don't, can't say that. So get your team and your staff on board with that vision. Let them help you craft that brand. Make sure that they understand and can talk about it at ease, and that will help to kind of bring everything together and create a stronger brand for your company.
Awesome. Thank you, Kelly, for that great setup. The brand portion of, kind of brand and marketing is so critical to get done properly. And the awareness building piece of that is important as well. And so let me just kind of start with that, is that, build and enable come is not a viable business strategy. The idea that you have a fantastic product and a beautiful logo, beautiful website, and you have your brand all set, it doesn't mean anything if people don't know you exist. And it doesn't mean anything if they can't find you. And so having that marketing component to it, then the awareness piece of the branding that Kelly was talking about, and then extending into marketing is really what you need to do in order to be effective. And so for small businesses and especially new businesses, that awareness piece is a critical priority for any business. Great products don't get discovered on their own. They need good marketing to help the right people find them. Kelly touched on this a bit, and so I'm not going to go into detail on this, but I look at it as a marketing ladder. It's really the progression of the relationship between the consumer and the brand. A lot of people refer to these as funnels, pipelines. I actually prefer to look at it as a ladder or a pyramid, because the awareness is the foundation, but it actually takes effort to move people up to those higher levels of a relationship with the brand and the organization. And as you do that, you want to consider what tactics you need to use, as well as what message they need to hear in order to move them from one stage to the other. So one helpful way to do this, and an approach that I think is particularly useful for businesses, is to create customer journeys. And a journey is really just outlining the different stages that the customer goes through when they're making the decision. And then you can use that as the basis for determining the tactics to use and the content that you need to create in order to move someone through that evolution. So having a clear call to action with each marketing piece that's appropriate to the stage that they're in is a really important piece that a lot of people don't necessarily think about. So I'm going to delve into that a little bit further here. And for this piece, I've really focused on awareness, consideration, and that initial purchase. There are other stages too, when you get to experiencing the product or the brand, and repeat purchase and loyalty and those sorts of things. But for purposes of this discussion, I'm going to zone in on the upfront portion of the customer journey. And I'm going to liken it to dating, relationship building. So think about awareness. That's really trying to get someone to swipe right in the first place. And that's introducing your target audience to your brand, your products and solutions, and identifying what's the pain point that they're experiencing for which you are the solution. So that's the question that you need to answer as you are communicating to them. An important thing to know when you're building awareness is that you need to reach beyond your current base of followers in order to really expand your brand awareness. So it often requires some kind of investment, whether that's public relations, whether that's paid advertising, something that gives you the opportunity to reach beyond your current follower base. When you look at consideration, then they already have that awareness of you, but now it focuses on educating them on selecting the right brand, product, or service, ideally yours. And so what should they be comparing and considering? And you have the opportunity to help guide that. The main thing is that at this point, they recognize that they have a problem, a pain point to be addressed. Now they need a deeper understanding of the solutions. And so that is your focus in the consideration phase. And so consider it to be like dating. You're getting to know each other and seeing if there's a good fit. Then the third piece on this exercise is the close, the purchase. And you're really trying to convince the prospect that your solution will solve their pain point. So you're trying to answer the questions of why you are the right choice. What do they need to know in order to make a decision? They understand that they have a problem. They understand more about the different solutions that are available to them. So now they're trying to ensure the right fit or choice. So consider this to be the proposal, the wedding ring. You're out down on one knee. You're trying to get them to join in holy matrimony for the foreseeable future. So then, kind of taking this to the next level, what does that mean in terms of tactics and messaging? Because that's really how you get this, you turn these philosophies into action. So you look at awareness, some of the tactics that you can use here, paid search, if they know about your kinds of products, your kinds of solutions, or if there are things that they're looking for that are indicators that your product might be a good solution, paid search can be a really good option. Advertising, whether that's broadcast or very targeted social media advertising, can be good here. Content shared beyond your current network. So that would be, posting on other people's blogs, being featured in a presentation, those kinds of things that get beyond your current customer base. These are good tactics here. Media relations, trade shows and presentations, landing pages are really good tools when you're in the awareness phase. And the kinds of call to action that you want to use are things like sign up for our email newsletter, follow us on social media for helpful information, join us for a webinar. It's very low commitment, low risk, because you're just getting to know them. They're just getting to know you. So you want things that are easy for them to opt into. For consideration, think about a drip email sequence. That's a collection of emails that are typically strung together and given to a person over a period of time that help them answer some key questions that they typically ask in this phase of the process to learn more. Social media posts can be good here too, because if they're already following you, this is a good place to speak to them. Webinars, downloadable PDFs that are like how-to guides that get into more specifics than in the awareness phase are really helpful. Sales meetings. And then calls to action can be, download something, click to schedule a call, join us for a webinar. And then the third component, the close and purchase, it could be a pitch deck or a proposal if it's a business-to-business kind of thing, promotional emails, maybe with an incentive to help, kind of get them over the edge to actually purchase. Sales meetings are great here. So calls to action would be click to purchase, buy now. Again, your pitch deck, your website pricing page, competitive comparisons, whatever they need to know in order to close the deal. So I know I'm going quickly here. We're a little short on time. So translating strategy and positioning into a plan, your tactics should really flow directly from your strategy. You want to choose the partners and the channels that are very consistent with your branding. If you are selling a luxury product, you don't necessarily want to have it available for distribution in Dollar General. You want to make sure that your choices are very much aligned with your overall branding strategy, and be where your prospect is looking for you and receptive to your message. Also keep in mind your business objectives and make sure that your tactics are very closely aligned with that. I have a little cheater slide that gives you some math that you can do if you need to calculate how many people you should be reaching with your marketing plan. I won't go into that here in the interest of time, but again, you can refer back to that in the deck and contact me if you have questions. Think of your integrated marketing plan as something that has multiple layers. Don't just look at one tactic and consider that your marketing plan, but look at it as a layered kind of an approach. And look at the best places to reach your audience. Where are the most receptive to hearing about it, and how does that then change over time? You might have more awareness at launch and hit harder on that, and then have more of these other tactics after you get to a certain level of awareness. Measurement is important, and marketing is an iterative process. So it's not just you test it, you measure it, and then you're done. It's constantly improving, testing, and learning along the way. Use things like Google Analytics. A lot of web-based marketing systems will help track email opens and responses, so you can really understand how effective things are. Think about engagement more so than likes. Engagement is really the comments and interactions that you're getting from people that show that they're really interested and engaged with your content. So build your measurements based on those things and then optimize over time. We have 2 minutes, so let me just hit on a couple of tips and tricks. First and foremost, we spent a lot of time, there's some really good information on branding and strategy, and investing in that is actually, it's the most important place for you to invest, because everything else flows from that. If you have your strategy and your branding nailed, it makes the subsequent tactics and choices much easier to make. So if you're going to invest somewhere, invest there. I don't recommend having an intern do your branding and your strategy. Create your FAQs from questions that you typically get asked in a sales call or in a meeting with a prospect. You can use that for content. It can be your FAQs on your website. It can be used for posts. It can inform your drip emails to those in the consideration set. Lots of places where you can repurpose that kind of content, and you know you're answering the kinds of questions that people are actually asking you. A few other tips and tricks here that you can go back to at your leisure. But I want to hit on the second one here, and just don't try to be everywhere. Don't try to do everything. Similar to what Kelly was saying about your target audience, you don't want to try and target everyone. You also don't want to spread yourself so thin on your marketing that you can't keep up, or you're just so thin in each of the places where you're operating that it doesn't get any visibility or attention. So choose the tactics where you make the most impact. You can always add over time. But be selective and very targeted, both in your target audience and in your tactics, and build on it from there. So thank you. I know we had a couple of questions here. Nikki had asked, and I know Kelly, this was during your portion, so I'll give you the chance to answer first if you like. What do you feel is the missing link when a person enjoys a product but not necessarily support the message or the people? Is it lack of research? Is it a form of smoke in the mirror?
That's a good question. So if somebody, I mean, it sort of sounds like the product is so enjoyed that the other forms of buckets or perceptions are not really, even if they don't resonate, they're not rising to the top, and the product, the connection to the product is overwhelmingly positive, so the other things don't matter. I think if you find that that's true at your company, I certainly would try to figure out, okay, how can the message or the people support a positively, seen product, so that there is a stronger bond across all of those different buckets of perception. But it's not something, if you have a product that people love, I mean, that's certainly a good place to start, and then you can kind of build around that. I'm not sure if that answers your question completely. Maybe Nikki, you want to speak up?
Oh, yeah. So it was more of just a curiosity question. So for instance, yeah, you went over like Chick-fil-A, for example, like everybody seems to love the nuggets there, right? So my question is but not everybody knows their messaging behind it, which is fine, like teach their own. But I think it's more of that, is it a PR standpoint or a branding standpoint where they're falling, or is it a smoke and mirror? They're not necessarily divulging who they are so that people are making the connection. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's a good point, because it's probably not so much that the company itself is putting some of those messages out there. It is the media that is generated around some of those stories and some of those, and it's because, I mean, this is an example where it's become like a political hot point. So it's not necessarily, this doesn't necessarily happen to us as business owners, but it's interesting